We all know that effective internal communication is the secret to high performing teams and companies. Did you know that according to a Tower Watson study, companies with effective employee communication tools see 47% higher total returns than businesses that communicate ineffectively? Beekeeper, a leader in employee communication, has developed an effective guide to help you understand your internal communications, especially if you work with a frontline team. Download Beekeeper's free guide today at www.beekeeper.io/crisis averted podcast. That's www.beekeeper.io/crisis averted podcast. Welcome to the Crisis Averted podcast, produced by CJ Media Solutions. I'm your host, CJ Arlotta. In this episode, I speak with Jeffrey L. Bowman, co-founder and CEO of Reframe. During our conversation, he explains why and how Fortune 1000 companies can culturally transform within the workplace as well as the marketplace. Feel free to send me your feedback at cj@cjmediasolutionsllc.com. Oh, and if you're listening to the Crisis Averted podcast on Apple Podcasts, please leave a rating, review, or both. I'd greatly appreciate it. Thanks for listening. Jeffrey, thanks for coming on the Crisis Averted podcast today.
No, thank you for having me, and look forward to a great conversation.
So for people who aren't familiar with you, Jeffrey, mind sharing a little bit about who you are, your background, and what you're up to now?
Yeah, no. So I'm the co-founder and CEO of Reframe, and Reframe is a platform that helps people leaders build more inclusive customer and employee experiences. And we've been around since 2015, started the company after leaving Ogilvy and Mather. And we've been on aggressive growth since then, given everything that's happened in the realm and changing demographics. Organizations are trying to figure out how to change and accelerate growth at the same time. So that's really what we help companies do.
You mentioned that it's a platform. How would you define platform?
Yeah, that's a great question. Now we live in the age of platforms. So when you think about software and services, first of all, we're a software and services company. And we first typically help by starting off with services, actually. We're a tech-enabled platform, meaning we design the experience. So think about an architect, before building the house, they have someone to design that house first. So we do the same thing in terms of building more inclusive customer and employee experiences. Once we design it, the technology is the enabler. And so we're able to build that inclusive employee experience and customer experience strategy and help fulfill those things or break those barriers, structural barriers or systems that may have been there by scaling and sustaining that inclusive employee and customer experience. So on our part, we believe we help solve that problem only when technology is enabled to help scale and sustain what you build or what you design. If not for that, we'd be still talking about this problem for another 60 years. And so we believe you first start with the design and then the technology.
How did you come about with that when it comes to figuring out that the technology aspect is really key for transformation?
Yeah, no, we essentially started off as a service company, and we were designing those experiences. And then we turn it over to the chief talent officer. So, if it's employee based, or we'd hand it over to the CMO if it's customer based. And so what we kept figuring out, if you think about, experience design, it's been about a 20-year spectrum. And so when you think about the customer side, it typically goes to, Facebook, Apple, Amazon, or Google to enable that and from a customer side. But when we got to the employee side, we saw employees were really struggling to enable that experience design from an employee perspective. And so they would either go from design to intranet or design to ERP, a custom solution, or what we call single-use applications. So think about Slack. And for the most part, they were fumbling. So you think about our early customers were Verizon, Wyndham Prudential, United. They really couldn't activate the design because of the technology handicap. And so what we did is we decided to build it on our own and took features that reflected what we call the messy middle from an employee experience standpoint.
What type of challenges did you come across when you were developing that technology? I mean, it sounds like that's something that's new. You had to really have a lot of R&D when it came to putting that platform together.
Yeah, and luckily, you look at a lot of technology solutions today that are being introduced. They go directly to the product or the application. For us, what we can honestly say, it was totally customer and user driven, and so we test and learn our way into it. As you think about 2015, 2017, we saw them, try and piecemeal their technology solutions, and it really could not replicate that entire employee journey. And so for us, because we saw those gaps, we took the features that enabled the employer to have the best design from an experience standpoint. So yeah, it was highly user driven. We co-developed it initially, built the MVP with Molson Coors, and obviously had some complications there, enable it. And so that's when we decided to go fully custom and build our own product.
What are some of the key features of that software?
Yeah, let's talk about, the key benefits.
Sure.
And when you think about how do you drive the inclusive design, first is collaboration. So if you think about the benefit of collaboration, what do you need? So we have a calendaring feature. You have a scheduling and calendaring feature. We have a messaging feature. And we have a community feature that's extremely helpful to build collaboration. And then, we were completing the product collaboration right around March of last year. Guess what happened? Everyone went to Zoom. So we included a video feature to round out that benefit of collaboration. Now, from a change perspective, you need an employee assessment. In addition to employee assessment, you need a LMS, a content management system, and then obviously to round it out, you need some type of effort that allows you to bring partners into the conversation from a content standpoint. And then the last piece is the effectiveness. And so we have a rewards management system and the measurement and reporting piece. And so when you can bundle all those different features, roll them up to the benefits, it takes you across that entire employee journey. And so eliminate the duplicative features and really drive towards the benefits, our three pillars.
Now, do the majority of your clients use all the features in the software, or do they pick and choose?
From a design perspective, what we see as we're doing the design, what we try and get clients to do is really focus on the user versus the features only. And by doing that, we're able to then say what features work best, what features are duplicative, and then how do you consolidate and build a much more integrated, holistic solution. So that's what we're able to be. So, and the last thing I'll say with regards to this, because it comes up often, you do not need all of our 12 features in most cases within a company. So we're really in the integration business. And I think for HR tech specifically, you have to come with that mindset, and we learned that pretty quickly, that it's not as mature as the customer experience side. So, you're going to have a lot of single-use applications. The trick is bringing those all together so you get one user experience.
Jeffrey, what is a people leader?
Yeah, here's what I'll say. It's a mindset. It's not a person. It's not a thing. It's a mindset. And the reason we decided to shift our overall value proposition to the people leaders platform is that a people leader, it's that person typically in a messy middle. It's the CEO saying, hey, here are the things that we need to get delivered. It's the employees are saying, hey, how can I help upskill, train, and get the most out of this experience? as an employee. And so what happened last year with regards to COVID, we had to step back and say, what differentiates us from a user standpoint? And two, when you think about the future of work, who's helping those people leaders to drive change at an accelerated pace? You have the CEO coming in from the top saying, these are the ambitions, the strategy, and mission value creation. Then you have employees for the first time, they're having to work from home. They need instructions, they're transitioning. So no one was really helping that people leader go through the transition. So we shifted our value prop to really focus on a mindset versus an actual person or title. And so that's what we mean by a people leader.
Did you see an uptick during the pandemic from clients, where people, prospects, were people reaching out to you a lot more than they were before the pandemic?
Absolutely. And, some people are like, hey, Jeff, when we first started to make this pivot from, experience design to actually delivery of that design, we had a number of naysayers saying, it's a crowded space. Why are you entering it? And then how's your value proposition different? And my answer was, one, we help companies build culturally inclusive employee and customer experience. Number two, because it is a digitally enabled product for the workplace as well as the marketplace, what most people don't understand or didn't know, that only 2% of Fortune 1000 companies are digital end to end. So significant digital transformation is going to happen. What COVID did is just accelerated all of that. And so now everybody went digital, very similar to the consumer space. And so the level of penetration as it relates to the workplace exceeded. And then obviously with incidents like, George Floyd and the continuum as it relates to, social justice, companies were looking for a different approach that was not only inclusive, but also scalable and sustainable. And so when we think about our product, we help drive culturally inclusive employee and customer experience through a digitally or tech-enabled product. And so we were positioned in prime and ready to go, and our businesses have a significant uptick.
When you first start with a prospect, what are they usually missing out of what you just mentioned?
Well, I think for the most part, customers and prospects that have come to us, the operative word is culturally inclusive. Mm-hmm. Now, initially they say, well, are you doing DE&I? Are you doing multicultural?
Right.
Those are amazing approaches. But, when you think about those two practices, how we assess the opportunity, those practices were introduced in, 1966, in the mid-60s. Those practices was about integration. And two, when you look at the futures of the workplace and the future of the marketplace, it's really about transformation, because for the first time in human history, women and minorities are going to become the majority population. And so for everything that's set up structurally and systems have to be transformed for these new users. And so that's where we came into play in terms of prospects. When they enter our lead gen opportunity, and then once they understand our true value prop as it relates to not only can you help design it and transform, but you can sustain it and scale it on a global basis through your tech-enabled product.
But so when it comes to, you mentioned the technology side and your services, how do you get both of them working together?
The interesting part, I think we've gotten that questions, with investors. We've gotten that questions, from people that are not in the delivery business. The two are not mutually exclusive. As a matter of fact, we're not like a single-use application, because if you look at, that space, yes, high traction, less friction, but typically they're not trying to solve the same problem that we're trying to solve for. And two, when we were exploring the marketplace in terms of how we enter, we knew we needed to land somewhere between single-use applications and custom, like an ERP. And so we land right there in the middle, meaning to solve for this problem, there has to be some type of design element, and then the tech enablement piece is a delivery mechanism.
Now, Jeffrey, you wrote a book, right? I believe back in 2015 about this approach.
Yes,
Yeah.
my wily publisher reminds me, Jeffrey, you are way ahead. You know, we've been working on this problem for about 10 years now, and so the book in itself was an extension of what some will say. McKinsey introduced a white paper in 1966 that was advising CEOs as it relates to the changing demographics, where you're going to go from 8% of blacks within the demographic ranking to potentially 15%. And then 1970 census first time included the U.S. Hispanic population. And so when you add up that, nearly 60 years, things needed to be updated as it relates to a playbook and thought leadership. And so when you think about Reframe the Marketplace, which is the title of our book, it's really an updated or reintroduction of the white paper, and then 5 years of evidence building as to why in the book, why organizations, Fortune 1000 companies, need to culturally transform within the workplace as well as the marketplace, and that's what the book is about. It's our playbook essentially in a book.
Have you seen more of an interest with all the events that have occurred, recently? Have you seen an uptick in interest in that?
Yeah, no, our publisher is extremely excited, obviously, given the resurgence of awareness. I think, for the most part, companies are really looking for something that's going to culturally transform them. I think for CEOs, not dissimilar to 1966, 67, 68, they're looking for solutions. I think what they have to get through is like, okay, what is the right approach? How is it that we can eradicate this and then create something that's ultimately scalable and sustainable? And I think that, because of the book that was written, there's been a resurgence, but it's a macro event that's only going to grow because it's the people changing. And so for a company who once thought that a product or solution, get back to the users, right? If the users are changing, your product has to reflect that as a whole. And that's how we design our product and user experience.
Yeah. Do you think that, there's always that talk when it comes to companies that a lot of it is just talk and no action? Are you seeing a lot more action with companies now that they're coming to you than maybe before? Maybe there were, companies coming to you and saying that they wanted to make change, but it was more really just lip service than anything else before.
That's a loaded question. and here's why.
Okay.
When companies are looking to transform digitally, quality, there's usually an instrument that is involved. If you look at the McKinsey's, the Bain's, and if you think about the practice or that subject matter expert within the company, when it comes to race and identity, they typically are going to go to the office of DE&I. Well, if you are looking to accelerate digitalization within workplace equality, you're going to have someone either like within corporate strategy or within change management, that practice lead to drive that shift. And so my counsel to my clients is that, this is change management, not DE&I and not multicultural, because you're looking for structural change. And oftentimes as facilitators of those practices, have haven't been in that skill set or haven't required for that skill set. And so that's why it's extremely valuable that the right questions are asked, the right practitioners are brought in, and you get, their approach, let's say a maturity model, and then you get the design, and then you get the scale piece as it relates to the product and software. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I mean, it seems like your approach is a lot more. There are a lot more layers to it than what businesses oftentimes look at it.
Yeah,
You know,
I mean, you take the CDC for the first time has identified racism as a health issue as well. I think companies, the talk that they've been doing has been from what we call outside in,
mm,
meaning there's a commercial application. There's, hey, we're going to donate X, Y, and Z, or hey, we're going to partner with X, Y, and Z.
right, right,
We take the issue with General Motors specifically. They said all the right things as it relates to crises, but they didn't do the work internally.
right, right.
So it has to be done from the inside out, not necessarily from the outside in. And so when you hear about these pronouncements, but what are the structural changes in place? Where's the maturity model in place so that you can measure and personalize that experience and shift attitudes and behaviors?
And something like that is, since it is a structural problem, that's going to take a lot more time to fix and adjust.
Yes. I mean, we tell clients all the time, this is 2 to 3 year journey at minimum. It's been 6 decades that clients, customers have been, within this. And, you're not going to fix it in 12 months.
Right.
When it's been 6 decades of really trying to understand and grapple with how to solve for this. And we think given the moment, given the tools that we've developed and the service application we have, we can help solve for this.
Jeffrey, what are you said it's about a 2 to 3 year journey. What are some of the obstacles, some of the most common obstacles and challenges they face when these companies go on that journey?
The number one is a transformation effort, not a DE&I effort. It's beyond DE&I. And what I mean by that, you're shifting attitudes and behaviors throughout the enterprise. That's recognition number one. Recognition number two, most barriers is the commitment as it relates to resources and structural and systems and strategy, like it has to permeate throughout the organization as it relates to that commitment. And number three, it's simple as it sounds. As a CEO, you cannot be afraid of the business negative impact, and it's not going to happen overnight. And most customers, they want a fix quick. And this is not a quick fix necessarily. It's an iterative fix. And it is software that helps you get that addressable data so that you can personalize that experience as to how to, help shift those attitudes and behaviors. And when you sit down with the CEO, and I'm saying CEO intentionally is because the CEO, the Chief Talent Officer, and the Chief Diversity Officer, that's in partnership. And it is because within the workplace you have these separate streams, function-wise, that you have to go across the organization to replicate that employee experience if you're talking about building more inclusive employee experiences. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and I wanted to just kind of follow up on that leadership component. Have you had clients that have gone through C-suite transformations, and has the next administration been able to sustain that transformation moving forward, or is there always that readjustment that you have to go
Yeah.
back to them for?
Well, let's talk about this being an innovation. Okay. We're just in, the first generation as it relates to cultural transformation. When you think about the workforce, let's say 1970 is when, you went from desegregation to integrated schools, and obviously they got more opportunities to, build more inclusive workplaces as well as become more upward and mobile. And so when you think about this being generation one, we haven't gotten to generation two where you've seen something shift and sustain from one administration to the next. Our client, Restaurants Associates, is one of those clients that has a CEO that is committed. Even during the pandemic, they said, hey, wait a minute, let's make sure that what we're doing is not just a pronouncement, but lives beyond my administration. And so that's why, they've committed to a 3-year commitment with us. So that's number one. And number two, for these organizations that, are catering to millennials and Gen Z, as we've seen with social impact, you're not necessarily going to just, make the pronouncement, put a plan in place. They're actually going to hold you accountable for that. And that's something that's different than past generations, meaning you had your ERG or you had your chief diversity officer. Well, if we look at, Adidas, for instance, where you had an ERG that gave a timeline to their senior leaders as to when they would need to transform and establish those KPIs. So it came from the bottom up, and it wasn't this idea of waiting to gain alignment or allyship. It was more like, hey, this is what needs to happen, or there will be accountability factors. And I think that's what's different, too, as a whole. Yes, absolutely. I think, one of the things coming from the vantage point that we're bringing is, we have our quote unquote earn and own media channels. When we were reevaluating our value prop, people leaders need help. And so the way that we help them is through our resources, obviously through our services and software, but this needs to be an ongoing conversation with subject matter experts at the table. And it moves beyond just a defensive mechanism, it becomes an offensive. And as it relates to transformation, we saw a market opportunity to come to market with our Change Summit. So we had the Reframe Change Summit coming in September, which is a one-day event, learning experience rather, for people leaders. And obviously we consider people leaders CEO, CMO, Chief Talent Officer, and then a Chief Diversity Officer. And so we had to, put a bucket, that's that. And then beyond that, we did a test in the summer of 2017, actually, develop a curriculum that replicates our design experience, but in snackable pieces. And so we put together a 12-week learning curriculum for marketplace transformation and workplace transformation, helping these people leaders. If you don't want the custom approach, you've got something already started, you can come to our Accelerator and get a smaller version that's not as custom, and you learn with other leaders, over the course of those 12 weeks. So that's coming up in Q4 of 2021.
Wow. And can anybody join that, or is that invitation only? How's that Accelerator program work?
Well, first they have to apply, because at the end of the day, we got to believe that, you're signing up and you want to see an outcome that's reflective of what we think change is. Mm-hmm. And so when you think about, we're going to release in the next couple of months the application. And again, we gleaned from what happens as it relates to Silicon Valley with the tech accelerators. You think about Y Combinator, you just don't get in. You have to apply. We have a board, a group of advisors going to review the application based on the responses. Then we'll determine, who's going to be that first batch. And so we're going to be looking anywhere from 15 to 20 companies. And the way that it works is that you go through the 12 weeks. At the end, of that 12 weeks, you have a demo and you present that demo to your peers within your enterprise, and then how you should use those resources to help drive cultural transformation from the inside out, or marketplace transformation as a whole.
And where you said the applications, they're not out yet, correct?
Applications are not out yet, but
Okay.
they can go to www.getreframe.io, www.getreframe.io, and they can submit their information. And then once the applications are released, they'll be the first one to get the alert with regard to the application process.
And what else do you have on the agenda for 2021? You mentioned a couple of things there. Are you doing anything new with the software or any other initiatives that you're working on for the remainder of the year?
No, so those are the two biggest learning experiences we think that enhances people learning more about what we do and how we do it, and the value prop associated with it. The other thing I'll say, we got a busy next couple of quarters. We just brought on a new client, and within that, we've obviously got our existing restaurants associate client, and we're helping companies with the reopening. And when you think about the timing of that, specifically within the U.S., this is more than enough work to do. But in terms of new, we have the product obviously with the release, and then the Reframe Change Summit in September, and the Reframe Change Accelerator in Q4.
Jeffrey, thanks for coming on the podcast today.
Once again, appreciate the invitation, and hopefully your listeners found value in this change.
Absolutely. I'm sure they did. Thanks.